It's a question that kind of hits you right in the gut. Yes, especially for us as Catholics, thinking about our faith. It's what Our Lady said at Fatima. Souls are falling into hell like snowflakes. And it's not just some kind of dramatic thing, right?
Yeah.
But it's like this really sad picture, like a mother looking at her kids and just like giving this warning. But it comes from a place of just like huge love for us.
It's a really powerful image, right? One that should make us really stop and think. And that's what we're going to do in this deep dive. We're going to try to understand this battle for souls, because it is a real thing. And we're going to explore the devil's strategies. Like, what is he doing in our time? We're going to look at it through, our Catholic faith.
Right.
And we're going to use these sources you've got.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, we've got some really heavy hitters here, right?
Yeah.
The messages of Fatima, the stuff that Gabriel Amorth saw, like The Exorcist.
Yeah.
And then the insights from like Padre Pio, Teresa Avila, John Vianney.
Right.
We're also going to touch on some of those prophetic visions.
Yeah.
Kind of scary stuff.
It is. It's a big topic, you know, one that really goes to the heart of our faith and like where we end up.
Right.
And our goal here isn't to freak anyone out.
Right.
It's more to like shed some light on this stuff so that people understand,
right,
and so that it helps you in your own, journey with God.
Okay, so let's start unpacking this.
Yeah.
One of the first things that like really jumps out is how the devil's working in our world today, right?
Yeah.
It's not always like some big crazy spectacle.
Yeah.
It's more subtle, you know? Like it's always there. It's always wearing away at things.
It's the slow burn.
Yeah. A lot of the sources talk about this,
Yeah.
The normalization of sin.
Yeah, it's almost like, stuff that we used to know was really, really bad.
Right.
Like seriously bad,
Right.
especially when it comes to like those sins of the flesh,
Yeah.
Things like lust, pornography, contraception, cohabitation, abortion.
Yeah.
And these things, they're so common now.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. And there are even some people who are saying, well, it's fine.
Right.
And this is not just some random thing that's happened in our culture. Right?
Yeah.
This is deliberate. This is part of the strategy.
Right.
And you got to think about the changes that have happened, like in people's minds and in our society, that make this possible.
Yeah.
This focus on what do I want rather than what does God want.
Right.
Traditional morality is kind of out the window, right?
Yeah.
And there's just this constant stream of messages from the secular world.
Yeah. It makes you think of that quote from Fulton Sheen. He said, "The refusal to take sides on great moral issues is itself a decision."
Right.
It's like saying that, like, if we just stay quiet, if we don't do anything about all this moral decay, it's not like we're neutral. We're actually making things worse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And if we think about the bigger picture, theologically, what Pope Benedict XVI said about the dictatorship of relativism, it's spot on.
Right.
This idea that there's no truth that's true for everybody, it has a huge consequence.
Right.
Because if nothing's really wrong, then sin doesn't mean anything.
Right.
And if sin doesn't mean anything, then why would you need to ask God for forgiveness? Why would you need to go to confession?
Right. It's dangerous. Right. Like, if we lose that clear sense of what's right and wrong in God's eyes, the devil's got a huge advantage.
Oh, yeah.
And it seems like another big strategy of his is to kind of chip away at the things that give us strength as Catholics.
Totally.
Our prayer life and the sacraments.
Absolutely. And here's the big question, right? Like, what are the most powerful ways that God gives us grace? It's the Eucharist, the body and blood of Christ right there.
Yeah.
And confession,
Yeah.
where our souls get cleaned from sin.
Yeah.
So, of course, the devil's going to go after those things, right?
Right.
He's going to try to make us not want to receive communion or not want to go to confession. He's trying to cut us off from God's life in us.
It's like he's trying to cut off our air supply spiritually.
It is, yeah.
And if we think about our own lives, right, it's obvious. When we don't pray, when we don't go to Mass, when we don't go to confession, we get weaker.
Totally.
We're more likely to fall into temptation.
And you're more open to, all this bad stuff that can get in.
Right.
And then there's another sneaky tactic the devil uses, isolation.
Right.
All these sources talk about how he wants to isolate us.
Yeah.
Emotionally, spiritually, and even through things that are supposed to connect us, like our phones and our computers.
Right.
It's so easy to get sucked into that digital world and forget about real people.
Yeah.
And it's in that isolation that he starts to whisper these lies,
Right.
things like, you're all alone, nobody gets you, God's forgotten about you.
It's so easy to get caught up in all that online stuff and then forget about, like, that real community of faith that we have.
Right.
And then, like, in that isolation, it's just you and the devil, and he's just whispering these horrible lies like, you're alone in this. No one understands you. God doesn't even care about you.
Exactly. He wants you to believe that you're so bad God can't forgive you, or that God's just left you behind.
Right.
And that can lead to despair.
Right.
Which is a big problem spiritually.
Right.
Because when we're isolated and alone, that's when those bad thoughts and those temptations really get a grip on us.
And it's pretty scary, too, when these sources talk about how the devil's trying to mess with the church, too.
Uh-huh.
Our spiritual home, saints like John Bosco and Blessed Aunt Catherine Emmerich, they have these visions, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Scary stuff.
It's pretty wild that all these prophets from all different times in history kind of say the same thing.
Yep.
Like, there's going to be scandals, things are going to get confusing when it comes to what we believe, and preaching is going to get kind of watered down.
Right.
And all that weakens us, right?
Right.
It plants these seeds of doubt. It lets wrong ideas spread.
Right.
And that makes it easier for the devil to lead people astray.
Yeah.
Because they're already confused. They don't know who to trust.
It feels like we're getting hit from all sides.
Yeah.
And so now let's look at what the exorcists and the saints have to say.
Okay.
Like, the people who've gone toe-to-toe with evil, Fra Gabriel Amorth, chief exorcist of Rome for years, he had a pretty good view of the devil's playbook.
Absolutely.
What he said about the devil's greatest trick, it's huge.
Yeah.
That he's convinced people he doesn't exist.
It's genius,
Yeah.
right? And it's so sneaky.
Yeah.
If we don't even believe he's real,
Right.
then we're not going to be watching out for him.
Yeah, it's like going to war and pretending the enemy's not even there.
Exactly. Yeah.
And he also said something that's kind of scary, that lots of bishops and priests today, they don't really believe in the devil or spiritual warfare anymore. Oh, man. And that makes, like, everyone's super vulnerable. It's like, sheep without a shepherd who can see the wolves coming.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
If the leaders in the church don't believe this is a real battle,
Right.
they can't protect their people. They
Yeah.
can't guide them.
Right.
Father Amorth also saw like a big increase in people getting possessed, and he said it was because of things like the occult getting more popular,
Right.
the amount of sexual sin that's happening,
Right.
and people just rejecting God.
And then there's Padre Pio, who actually fought the devil, like,
Yeah.
physically. There are all these stories about him getting attacked, just tortured. It's intense. It shows how real this spiritual fight is. But he knew how to defend himself, too.
Yeah. What stands out to you about Padre Pio's approach? Like, what really speaks to you?
Well, he really emphasized the rosary, right? Like, he was saying it's a key weapon we need in these times. And, of course, his devotion to the Mass, to confession, like, those are the sources of protection, of grace.
Right.
It just, like, reinforces how important it is to stay close to those gifts God's given us.
Yeah, stick close to the source.
Right, exactly.
And then there's St. Teresa of Avila, who adds another piece to this puzzle, right?
Oh, yeah.
She says that what the devil is really terrified of is humility and obedience.
Right.
And that makes sense when you think about it, right?
Yeah.
Because pride is what got him kicked out of heaven in the first place.
Right.
So humility is the opposite of that.
Right.
And when we're obedient to God,
Right.
the devil can't get his hooks into us.
Yeah.
He can't manipulate us.
Right.
And she also reminds us how strong we are as Catholics.
Right.
She says that a soul in a state of grace, that means your soul is clean, you're free from serious sin.
Right.
A soul in a state of grace is stronger than hell itself.
That's encouraging.
It is.
That's good to know.
Yeah. And then you've got St. John Vianney, and the devil actually admitted he was so mad. He's like, if there were just 3 more priests like you, my kingdom would be ruined.
Wow.
Talk about the power of a holy priest, especially through confession.
Really, yeah.
He would just spend hours and hours in the confessional, hearing confessions.
Right.
That was his way of fighting the devil.
Right.
Bringing people back to God's mercy.
And then, bringing it a little closer to our time, Sister Lucia of Fatima, in her later writings, she said that the last battle between God and the devil, it's going to be over marriage and the family.
Wow.
And, I mean, you see that today, right?
Uh-huh.
The family is under attack everywhere.
Yeah.
And if the family breaks down, then everybody in it is weaker.
Right. They're more likely to be influenced by bad stuff, by the devil's temptations.
Yeah, so when you look at all this together, it's pretty clear there's a spiritual war going on, right?
Yeah.
And like the sources say, the sides are getting clearer.
Yeah. You've got the people who are trying to follow God's will, and then you've got the people who, maybe without realizing it, are on the other side.
And in this spiritual war, Mary's role is crucial, right?
Absolutely.
She's the woman clothed with the sun.
Yeah.
You know, that powerful figure in Revelation 12 who crushes the serpent's head. We need her help, her protection.
We do. And the cool thing is she's given us the tools to fight back.
Right.
The rosary, the scapular, devotion to the first Saturdays. And of course, she's always calling us to change our hearts, to do penance.
Those are real weapons, right?
They are, yeah. They're not just some traditions.
Right.
They're gifts from our Mother in Heaven to help us fight this battle.
So practically speaking, like, what can we do in our everyday lives as Catholics
Okay.
to fight in this battle and protect ourselves and the people we love?
Yeah.
Because these sources give us some pretty clear instructions.
Absolutely. And the foundation, the most important thing, is to try to live in a state of grace all the time. Like, that's what the saints always tell us. Go to confession often, pray every day, you know, even if it's just for a few minutes.
Right.
And receive the Eucharist regularly, as long as you're in a state of grace, of course.
Right. Right.
And for those who maybe aren't as familiar, being in a state of grace just means that your soul is clean from serious sin because you've been to confession.
Right.
And that lets God's life really live in you.
And then there's consecrating ourselves to Mary, you know, recognizing her as our spiritual mother, the one who protects sinners, the one who scares the hell out of demons, literally.
Oh, literally.
It's like saying, Mary, I trust you to protect me.
Absolutely, yeah. Put yourself under her care.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And spreading the message of Fatima, the message of prayer, penance, and reparation.
Yeah. And just so we're all on the same page, reparation is like making up for our sins, both our own and other people's sins, right?
Yeah.
Out of love for God and for our neighbors. It's like saying sorry to God for all the bad stuff that's happened.
Yeah. And I was really struck by the emphasis on praying and offering sacrifices for the souls in purgatory, the souls that are lost.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like Our Lady said, they're in danger because nobody's praying for them.
Right.
Even little things, you know, like giving up something we like.
Yeah, yeah.
If we offer it up with love, it can make a big difference.
It shows how connected we are, you know? We're all part of the body of Christ.
Right.
So our prayers and our sacrifices, they help other people, even people we don't know. They help bring them closer to God's mercy.
So now let's dig into those quotes from Far Amorth, you know, especially about Our Lady's warning at Fatima about souls falling into hell like snowflakes.
Okay.
It's such a powerful image.
Yeah.
And Far Amorth helps us understand how this can happen, why it happens.
Right. What's really interesting is how Far Amorth ties our freedom, our ability to choose, with the reality of hell.
Okay.
He said, men are free to choose whether they wish to live for God or against him, and therefore to opt for heaven or for hell. God gives us the choice, even if it's a bad choice.
Yeah.
And what Our Lady showed at Fatima, it wasn't just to scare us.
Right.
It was to show us how important it is to choose right, to choose God.
Yeah. Hell's not just some random punishment. It's what happens when we choose to reject God's love and his truth. And for Amorth, he really gets the devil's tactics, you know?
Yeah.
He nails them.
Yeah.
Pride, lust, money.
Right.
Those are the big ones.
Classic. Those are the classic three temptations.
Yeah.
Pride, loving yourself too much.
Right.
Lust, wanting all the wrong kinds of pleasure.
Right.
And greed, loving money more than anything else.
Right.
And those are the things that get us all the time.
Right. And what makes it worse is that today, our culture, it glorifies these things.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we're constantly told to think about ourselves first, to go after whatever we want, to get rich.
Right.
It's the opposite of what the gospel teaches.
Absolutely. It's like they flipped the script.
Yeah. And this quote from Frau Amorth, it's kind of scary. He said, "The greatest challenge is normalizing the abnormal and making the extraordinary ordinary."
That is so true, isn't it? It's not just about tempting us to do one bad thing or another.
Right.
It's about changing the whole world around us.
Right.
So that sin doesn't even seem like sin anymore. It just seems normal.
Right.
Acceptable.
Yeah.
You know, like it's our right to do whatever we want.
And it's all over the place.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
The media, movies, TV, even the laws are changing to make sin seem okay.
It's everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's understandable, really, why so many people are ending up in hell.
Right.
They don't even realize it. They're just drifting along with the crowd.
Like snowflakes, you know,
Exactly, like snowflakes.
just falling.
Yeah.
And Frau Amorth also talks about what we take in through our senses.
Right, right.
What we see, what we hear, what we read. He said, each of us becomes what we see, what we listen to, and what we read. And he warns us about, like, horror movies,
Yeah.
stuff that glorifies violence and the occult.
Yeah.
And this is so relevant now.
It is. I mean, we're bombarded with media all the time. The
Yeah.
devil's smart. He knows that.
Yeah.
He can influence us, not just by tempting us directly,
Right.
but by controlling what we see and hear.
Right.
It changes us, sometimes without us even knowing it.
And that's especially true for kids, right?
Oh, yeah.
Their minds are still forming.
Your moral compass is still developing.
Right. And that brings us to his point about losing the sense of sin, of the supernatural. He said, when faith disappears, one abandons himself to superstition and occultism.
Wow.
And he sees how the devil's always trying to destroy our belief in love, in God's love, in human love.
Right.
And he attacks authority,
Yeah.
like parents, the church.
It's like the world's losing its grip on what's real, what's true, what's good.
Right.
It's like Sister Lucia said, it's decaying from the inside.
Yeah. And Faramorth, he was big on teaching kids about their faith, about God from a young age.
Yeah.
He said, it is necessary to educate them from an early age to cultivate a life of faith.
Yeah, you got to give them a strong foundation.
Right.
Teach them about God's love, about his rules.
Yeah.
Get them praying, get them to the sacraments. Otherwise, they're easy targets for the devil.
Right. And like it's what Our Lady was saying to Fatima, we need to protect kids.
Yeah.
And he said something else that was really simple but powerful in Spanish. He said, el empeño plan del diablo era hacer que el hombre piense solo en las cosas de la tierra.
Oh, yeah.
Which means, like, the devil's main goal is to make people think only about earthly things.
Keep us focused on stuff that doesn't really matter.
Right.
Our jobs,
Right.
stuff,
Yeah.
all the little pleasures.
Yeah.
Anything to keep us from thinking about eternity.
Right. It's like keep us so busy with the stuff of this world
Yeah.
that we never stop and think about what really matters. You know?
Yeah, it's like, look at the shiny thing.
Right. Exactly.
Don't look up.
Gosh.
Don't look at God.
And that's how it happens, right?
Yeah.
Like those snowflakes, all those distractions, they add up.
Yeah.
And before you know it, you're lost.
Mm.
But, even with all that, Faramorth gave us hope too.
Absolutely.
He said, Christ's centrality tells us that we can be saved only in his name. It is only in his name that we can win and free ourselves from the enemy.
Right.
And, the devil is nothing against the mercy of God.
The power of Jesus, there's nothing stronger.
Right.
And like Our Lady said at Fatima, her Immaculate Heart will protect us.
Yeah.
She'll lead us back to God.
So we're not alone, even in this crazy battle.
Not at all.
And Christ already won the victory on the cross.
He did. Farmer's just reminding us how urgent Our Lady's message is,
Right.
but also how much hope we have in Jesus and Mary. If we change our hearts, if we pray, if we go to the sacraments, if we love Our Lady, nobody has to fall into hell.
One thing that I've noticed in these sources is that the devil often leaves people who are really caught up in sin alone,
Yeah.
but he really goes after people who are trying to get back to God or become holier.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to make sense at first,
It's kind of weird, right?
Yeah.
But it makes sense when you think about the devil's plan.
Yeah.
Faramorth said it perfectly. The devil leaves those in sin alone because he already has them. It is those who are trying to live a life of grace, those who pray, go to Mass, confess, that he attacks.
Right. Why would he waste his time on someone who's already on his team?
Exactly. He doesn't need to convince them.
Right.
He's worried about the ones who are trying to escape.
Yeah.
And you see this in the lives of the saints.
Right.
Take St. Teresa of Avila, for example. The closer she got to God through prayer,
Right.
the more the devil attacked her
Yeah.
because she was becoming a threat.
Right.
Her prayer life was dangerous to him.
Mm-hmm.
So he tried to distract her, to make her feel bad, to make her give up.
And Padre Pio, too, right?
Oh, yeah.
He got beat up, tormented, especially when he was hearing confessions or offering his suffering for others.
Yeah.
It's like the devil knew how much good Padre Pio was doing,
Mm-hmm.
and he tried to stop him.
He hated it.
Yeah.
And St. John Vianney, too. There are stories about how the night before a big confession, the devil would torment him.
Wow.
That's how much the devil hates confession.
Right.
It frees people from his grip.
And Faramorth warned us about how the devil targets families.
Yeah.
Yeah. He called them the domestic church,
Right.
the foundation of everything.
The building blocks.
Yeah. And if he can break that down,
Uh-huh.
if he can break apart the family, then everyone's weaker.
Exactly. Yeah.
And he said that often when one person in a marriage starts to get closer to God,
Yeah.
the fights and arguments at home get worse.
Yeah, that's the devil trying to cause trouble.
Right.
It's not that the conversion is wrong. It's that the devil's trying to break them up.
Right.
Because a family that prays together is strong.
Yeah. And Fromworth talked about how sneaky the devil is, too.
Oh, yeah.
You know, those thoughts that creep into our minds.
Yeah, like what? Yeah.
Like, God could never forgive you. Your
Yeah.
life is pointless.
Yeah.
Your prayers don't mean anything.
Right.
It's just designed to make us lose hope.
Exactly. He wants us to doubt God's mercy.
Yeah. And these attacks often get worse after we've experienced something good spiritually.
Yeah.
Like after we've been to confession or we've had a really powerful prayer time.
It's like he's trying to steal the grace we just received.
Right.
To make us doubt what just happened.
Yeah. And the Bible talks about this too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8, it says, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour."
Yeah, he's always on the prowl.
Yeah.
And in Luke chapter 11, Jesus tells a parable about an unclean spirit that comes back with 7 more, even worse than before.
Right.
So we got to be careful. We got to stay on guard.
In Ephesians chapter 6, right?
Yeah.
It talks about putting on the armor of God.
Yeah, we're in a battle. We need protection.
So if things start getting crazy in our lives,
Yeah.
if we start doubting, if temptations get stronger, especially after we've made a commitment to pray more, to go to confession,
Right.
to be more devoted to Mary, it might actually be a good sign.
A sign that we're on the right track, that the devil's noticed us,
Right.
that we're a threat to him.
Right. And we can't give up.
Right. No way.
We got to keep fighting.
We got to stand our ground.
And how do we do that?
We got to stay in a state of grace,
Right.
ask Mary for help,
Right.
and don't talk to the devil. Just shut him down. Use the name of Jesus.
Right.
And keep praying, even when it feels like nothing's happening.
Right.
Even when it's hard, even when we're tired. Right. And offer up our suffering.
Yeah.
Unite it with Jesus' suffering on the cross.
That's powerful.
Yeah. You know, these sources have some really interesting stories about how the devil goes after people who turn to God.
They do, yeah. They really bring this idea to life.
Like Saint Mary of Egypt.
Yeah.
She lived a really sinful life.